The line stretched down the block, quiet, heavy, filled with faces that did not belong there. They were not the unemployed or the forgotten. They were federal workers, still wearing their government IDs around their necks like proof of loyalty. And yet tonight, they were waiting for groceries handed out by strangers. Mothers in TSA uniforms held bags of rice and beans, eyes darting to their children who didn't yet understand why mom's job no longer put food on the table. Coast Guard officers, still in crisp jackets, whispered apologies to spouses as they carried boxes of milk and bread to their cars. In the richest country on earth, its own workers stood in line for food, not because of war, but because Washington had shut itself down. At airports, TSA agents reported for duty, guiding thousands of passengers with steady hands, while their own bills piled higher by the day. At the gates of the Statue of Liberty, tourists who had traveled across oceans were met not with grandeur, but with a locked fence and a handwritten sign, "Closed until further notice." In the echoing halls of the Smithsonian, lights flickered off, leaving history itself in the dark. Elsewhere, the absurdity deepened. Courtrooms fell silent because judges couldn't convene. Critical medical research sat in limbo, experiments frozen mid-progress. Farmers who dialed the Department of Agriculture found only dead phone lines. The nation that prided itself on resilience now felt brittle, hollow, and unsteady. News cameras captured the chaos. Anchors' voices cracked with disbelief. How could the world's most powerful democracy grind to a halt over political brinkmanship? Social media burned with rage. Hashtags like Shutdown stories lit up timelines as workers shared pay stubs marked 0-0-0. One man posted a photo of his toddler's empty lunchbox with a caption that read, "Daddy serves his country, but who serves us?" The outrage grew into a national chorus, but beneath the anger pulsed something deeper: fear. If this could happen to those who served the government, to those who wore the uniform, to those who kept planes flying and monuments shining, then no one was safe from the whims of political arrogance. But this was just the beginning. The shutdown's ripple effects reached into every home in America. A government shutdown is not simply the lights going out in Washington. It is the slow unraveling of a system that millions depend on every single day. When Congress fails to pass funding, the gears of government don't just pause, they grind to a halt, leaving entire agencies frozen in place, their workers furloughed, their missions abandoned mid-stride. On paper, it looks like bureaucracy stalled. In reality, it feels like a nation abandoning its people. Veterans expecting monthly benefits find their checks delayed, standing in bank lines with disbelief written across their faces. National parks, once brimming with families and tourists, fall eerily silent. Trails are blocked, gates chained, and signs warn visitors to turn back. Children who relied on subsidized school meals watch as cafeterias cut services, the sound of their stomachs suddenly louder than the chatter of classrooms. For families living paycheck to paycheck, the shutdown isn't an abstract policy fight. It is a gut punch. A single mother who sorts mail for a federal agency stares at her overdue utility bill, wondering if heat will vanish before winter does. A federal contractor who mops floors in a government building is told he'll never see the wages he lost, because unlike federal employees, his back pay isn't guaranteed. In living rooms across the country, anxiety grows heavier than the air itself. The shutdown's shadow stretches further still. Airport travelers face longer security lines as unpaid TSA agents call out sick in exhaustion. Farmers find themselves locked out of loan programs that keep their businesses alive. Small businesses, tied to federal contracts, suddenly collapse without warning. Even medical trials searching for cures to deadly diseases are forced to stop, lives hanging in limbo because politics demanded a pause. And then comes the deeper wound, the blow to democracy itself. For every American watching the spectacle, the message is clear. The very leaders sworn to safeguard the nation are willing to gamble with its stability. The government is not some distant monolith. It is the sum of millions of ordinary people holding the fabric of the country together. When that fabric tears, the entire idea of America feels fragile. Commentators call it dysfunction. Citizens call it betrayal. For immigrant families who came to the United States believing in its promise of order, progress, and justice, the shutdown feels like the mask slipping, revealing cracks in the system they trusted. Children ask their parents why the government has stopped working, and no answer seems good enough. The world is watching too. Headlines in Europe and Asia describe the United States, the nation that once styled itself as democracy's beacon, as a government unable to keep its doors open. The image is humiliating, but more than that, it is dangerous. If America cannot govern itself, what does it signal to its allies, its rivals, its own people? As the hours turned to days, frustration curdled into outrage. Lines at food banks grew longer. Public anger boiled hotter. The country found itself staring at a single haunting question, whispered on talk shows, shouted at rallies, and muttered in family kitchens across America. And as the hours turned to days, the question emerged, who was really to blame? The stage for every government shutdown is not built in the lives of workers, but in the chambers of power. Here, the villain emerges, not a single face, but a mindset, an arrogance that drapes itself in patriotic language while playing roulette with the nation's stability. These lawmakers do not see the shutdown as a tragedy. They see it as leverage, a bargaining chip to force their will on opponents. For them, pain is not collateral damage. It is the plan. The history is telling. The United States has endured more than 20 shutdowns since the late 1970s. Each one carried the fingerprints of political brinkmanship. But in recent decades, the tactic evolved from an accident of missed deadlines into a weapon deliberately unsheathed. The most infamous came in the mid-1990s, when a standoff between President Bill Clinton and Speaker Newt Gingrich shuttered the government for weeks. Gingrich himself later admitted that part of his fury stemmed from being slighted on Air Force One, as though personal ego justified halting a nation. Years later, in 2013, another shutdown gripped the country. This time driven by lawmakers determined to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. Millions lost services. Hundreds of thousands of workers went unpaid. And yet, in the halls of Congress, speeches thundered with righteousness. To those wielding the shutdown, it was not sabotage. It was strategy. They claimed to be standing for principle, but the principle always seemed conveniently aligned with power, headlines, and fundraising. In each of these battles, the pattern repeated. The people who suffered most were never those delivering the fiery speeches. They were the families far from the marble steps of Washington, people who had no choice in the fight, no say in the games played over their lives. Yet the villain framed it differently. With every microphone in reach, they boasted of courage, of standing firm, of refusing to compromise. Their voices dripped with bravado, dismissing the human cost as though it were mere background noise. One senator sneered on live television that furloughed workers would make it through just fine, suggesting they could dip into savings. Savings? For families living paycheck to paycheck, the comment rang like a slap in the face. Another congressman chuckled when asked about the hardship faced by federal employees, quipping that missing a paycheck was no different than a long vacation. The indifference was staggering. The suffering was invisible to them because it was not their own. This is the heart of the villain's story. Greed for power dressed up as duty. Shutdowns become hostage notes, written in the language of governance but signed in arrogance. The weapon is not bullets or bombs, but withheld paychecks, closed doors, silenced agencies. The ransom demand is always the same. Yield to our agenda or watch the nation crumble. Contrast this with the quiet dignity of those enduring the consequences. The janitor who keeps reporting to clean congressional offices despite not being paid. The park ranger who must turn away crying children from a monument, even while knowing their disappointment will never reach the ears of those responsible. Ordinary Americans show up, do their duty, and carry the burden. Lawmakers, meanwhile, turn that burden into a talking point. The villain thrives on division, painting opponents as weak, unpatriotic, or reckless, all while their own tactics strangle the very system they claim to defend. They speak of protecting taxpayers, yet cost the economy billions. They speak of serving the people, yet dismiss the cries of the people most directly harmed. In their hands, governance becomes theater, with shutdowns as their most dramatic prop, and the cameras love it. Television networks beam their fiery speeches into millions of homes. Their soundbites trend on social media, shared not as solutions but as spectacles. Every dismissive laugh, every condescending shrug is magnified, giving the impression of strength. Yet behind the facade of confidence lies something smaller, pettier, the willingness to gamble livelihoods for applause. This arrogance is not just political strategy, it is betrayal. It reveals a worldview where citizens are pawns, where service is expendable, and where power is the only prize worth chasing. And every time the government shutters, every time workers line up for food banks, that betrayal deepens. But while the cameras captured their speeches, behind the scenes, another story was unfolding, the human story. In the shadow of marble halls and gilded speeches, the true heroes of the shutdown were not the lawmakers who argued on television, but the people who endured its cruelty in silence. They were ordinary Americans, whose names never made headlines, yet whose sacrifices revealed the moral center of the nation. Take Maria, a single mother in Ohio who worked at the Internal Revenue Service. Every day she showed up on time, processing the paperwork that kept the machinery of government running. Her pride was simple: to provide for her 2 children, to keep the roof over their heads, and to model the dignity of service. When the shutdown came, Maria's paycheck vanished overnight. The bills did not. Rent was due, her car payment loomed, and her son needed asthma medication that the pharmacy would not dispense without cash up front. She looked at her children's sleeping faces and decided that no matter what, she would not let them see her cry. She cooked simple meals from whatever she could find in the pantry and told her children it was adventure food, disguising sacrifice as play. Then there was James, a Coast Guard officer stationed in Virginia. His uniform was pressed, his duty unwavering. He swore an oath to protect his country's coasts, intercept smugglers, and rescue those lost at sea. That oath did not pause when his paycheck did. He kept reporting for duty, commanding a vessel that patrolled icy waters, knowing that at home his wife was stretching every dollar, choosing between groceries and diapers for their newborn. James never complained in public. He saluted, he worked, he saved lives. But at night, when he called home, he heard the strain in his wife's voice and the quiet question that haunted them both. How long could they keep going? And in the very heart of Washington, there was Elijah, a janitor at the Capitol. He swept the floors beneath the feet of senators, emptied trash cans outside offices where shutdown speeches were drafted, and polished the halls where history was made. Yet Elijah himself had no safety net. His paycheck evaporated the moment Congress turned out the lights. Contractors like him were not guaranteed back pay. Every hour lost was income he would never recover. Still, he came when called, out of pride and a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. He carried himself with quiet dignity, even as he left work and walked past food pantries offering bags of groceries for furloughed employees like him. These stories were not isolated. They multiplied across the country. The TSA officer driving for a rideshare company after long shifts. The park ranger apologizing to families at locked gates. The research assistant watching years of cancer trials stall midstream. Their struggles echoed the truth. The government may have shut down, but their duty never did. What made these Americans heroic was not just their endurance, but their refusal to let bitterness define them. Maria read bedtime stories to her children by candlelight when the electricity bill went unpaid, framing it as a game of camping inside. James taped motivational notes above his wife's desk, reminding her that their strength was bigger than their paycheck. Elijah cracked jokes with his fellow janitors, lifting spirits in corridors where despair might have easily settled. They did not command microphones. They did not sit on panels or go viral for their speeches, but their resilience spoke louder than any headline. They reminded the nation of its truest values: sacrifice, service, and quiet dignity in the face of arrogance. They revealed the beating heart of America not in the grand gestures of politicians, but in the persistence of ordinary people determined to keep faith with their country, even when their country failed them, and gradually their stories began to surface. Local news stations interviewed workers at food banks, their words raw and unpolished, but cutting through the noise with clarity. Social media amplified their voices. A Coast Guard wife writing that, "My husband saves lives, but Congress won't save ours." A single mother tweeting her empty fridge alongside the caption, "We serve, we wait, we suffer." These posts struck chords far beyond their communities. They became rallying cries, humanizing the shutdown in ways no statistic could. The villains in Washington might have believed they controlled the narrative, but the heroes were rewriting it, one testimony at a time. In a nation fatigued by political theater, authenticity shone like a beacon. These workers had no agenda but survival, no platform but their own pain, and yet their dignity transformed that pain into power. America's moral compass did not reside in the Capitol dome. It resided in the courage of people like Maria, James, and Elijah. They did not seek glory. They sought fairness. They did not wield arrogance. They carried humility. And in doing so, they exposed the hollowness of those who held the government hostage, and when the pressure mounted, their voices broke through the noise. The Capitol floor became a battlefield, every speech a weapon, every gesture a calculated strike. Lawmakers rose with fiery words, their voices echoing through marble chambers as if volume alone could disguise the paralysis gripping the country. On one side, the villains of the story framed the shutdown as a noble stand. They puffed out their chests, insisting they were defending the taxpayer, defending freedom, defending America itself. In truth, they were defending pride, using millions of workers as pawns in their high-stakes chess match. Grandstanding became the order of the day. One congressman thundered that compromise would be surrender. Another smirked on camera, claiming federal workers would thank us later for the fight. The words dripped with detachment, as if families scrambling to pay rent were invisible, as if hunger could be dismissed as a temporary inconvenience. The arrogance was breathtaking, and yet the cameras magnified it, giving the impression that strength was found in refusal. Across the aisle, defenders of the people pleaded for an end to the chaos. They told stories of veterans missing medication, of children skipping school meals, of families racking up credit card debt just to survive. But each plea was met with more defiance, more posturing, more doubling down. The chamber swelled with heat, not light. Outside Washington, the nation was watching, and the outrage was spreading like wildfire. TV anchors fanned the flames, replaying clips of lawmakers' dismissive remarks against the backdrop of empty fridges and shuttered monuments. Editorial boards blasted the dysfunction. Late-night hosts mocked the absurdity, but beneath the laughter was anger, sharp and growing. On social media, hashtags surged. Like shutdown stories gave way to "pay our workers," then "do your job." Federal employees posted selfies holding pay stubs marked with zeros. Parents shared photos of kids standing outside closed national parks, disappointed faces pressed against locked gates. The internet became a megaphone for frustration, amplifying voices that could no longer be ignored. Citizens organized rallies, gathering outside congressional offices with homemade signs, "End the shutdown," "We serve too," "Families first." The crowds were not massive, but they were heartfelt, and their images traveled across screens nationwide. In their testimonies, shaky, emotional, unpolished, there was a clarity that no politician's speech could rival. One furloughed worker broke down in tears during a town hall, saying, "I love my job, I love my country, but I can't feed my kids on love alone." The tension built with every passing day. The villains boasted louder, convinced their strategy would break opponents. The heroes spoke more passionately, their dignity laying bare the cruelty of the game. The contrast was cinematic: arrogance against humility, sound bites against lived reality. And slowly, the nation's patience wore thin. Polls showed Americans blaming the shutdown not on abstract dysfunction, but on the lawmakers who orchestrated it. Pressure mounted, cracks appeared, yet the stalemate held. The sense of outrage morphed into something heavier, the demand for a reckoning. And then came the breaking point, the moment when the shutdown battle could no longer be ignored. The chamber was packed. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves strained to hold the weight of tension. C-SPAN cameras flickered, journalists leaned forward in their seats, and staffers whispered nervously in the shadows. It wasn't just another day of partisan gridlock. This was the day ordinary Americans were stepping into the spotlight, refusing to be background characters in the drama of their own lives. The first testimony came from a woman in a crisp but faded IRS uniform, her voice trembling at first but steadying as she spoke. She was a single mother of 2, furloughed without pay for weeks. "I've served my country faithfully for 15 years. I collect taxes to fund the government that now tells me I am disposable. Yesterday, I stood in line at a food pantry with my federal ID badge still around my neck. My children ask me why I wear it if it doesn't mean anything anymore." Gasps rippled through the room. For a moment, even the lawmakers who had boasted of their principled stand a day earlier lowered their eyes. The cameras zoomed in on her face, tired but unbroken, and the clip would later explode online, shared with captions like, "The real face of the shutdown." Next came a Coast Guard officer, dressed in uniform. His salute was sharp, but his testimony was sharper. "I have guarded America's shores. I have chased down smugglers in storms you wouldn't dare enter. I did it because I believe in this country. But this month, I told my wife I didn't know how we'd pay the mortgage. I never imagined serving my nation would mean asking neighbors for grocery money. We serve our country. But our country must not abandon us." The silence that followed was deafening. Not the comfortable silence of order, but the suffocating kind. The silence when truth lands so hard it leaves no room for rebuttal. As the testimonies continued, each voice added a new fracture to the wall of arrogance lawmakers had built. A janitor from the Capitol itself spoke of cleaning the very floors where politicians dismissed his worth. A park ranger described turning families away from the Grand Canyon gates. A cafeteria worker from a federal building whispered through tears, "We feed you, but we can't feed ourselves." The public was glued to their screens. News networks replayed the clips with somber music, anchors shaking their heads in disbelief. Social media turned the testimonies into a chorus of pain and pride, hashtags trending in multiple languages. Memes mocked the grandstanding politicians, while emotional posts rallied behind the workers. The villains of the story were losing control of the narrative. Then came the viral moment, the mic drop counterattack that no one saw coming. A young congresswoman, standing with tears in her eyes, rose to speak after hearing the testimonies. Her words were simple but devastating. "If this government can't guarantee dignity to those who serve it, then what exactly are we defending? This isn't fiscal responsibility. This is hostage-taking. This is cruelty dressed up as politics." The chamber erupted. Some lawmakers clapped, others shouted in protest, but the effect was irreversible. Her speech shot across the internet like lightning. Clips cut into 30-second bursts, perfect for TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Millions watched, millions shared, and suddenly the debate that villains tried to frame as abstract became human, moral, unavoidable. In rally after rally across the country, ordinary Americans repeated her words. Crowds gathered outside shuttered monuments, chanting, "Dignity! Dignity!" Protest signs declared, "We are not pawns," and "End the cruelty now." It felt less like political activism and more like a moral awakening. And under the floodlights of this outrage, the villains cracked. In interviews, their words wavered. Some tried to laugh it off, others deflected, but the weight of public fury bent even their steel spines. Polls showed their approval ratings plummeting, with independents and moderates abandoning them in droves. The bravado of standing firm suddenly looked like the stubbornness of a child refusing to apologize. The turning point arrived in one unforgettable scene, a televised hearing where a lawmaker infamous for his swagger faced questioning from a furloughed worker. She leaned into the microphone and asked, "Sir, do you get paid during a shutdown?" He hesitated, smirk fading, and admitted quietly, "Yes." The room erupted in boos. That clip played on loop across every platform, the moment arrogance collapsed into shame. From then on, the narrative belonged to the heroes. The dignity of workers rose higher than the pride of politicians. Each testimony, each rally, each viral clip hammered home the same truth. America was not being held hostage by abstract numbers, but by the arrogance of leaders who forgot whom they served. The media caught on. Headlines shifted from "Parties deadlocked" to "Workers fight back." Editorials praised the courage of everyday citizens. Late-night hosts, once mocking the absurdity, now honored the bravery of federal employees speaking out. It was as if the country's moral compass, long spinning in chaos, had finally found north again. But even as hope surged, the suspense deepened. Because as lawmakers scrambled for an exit strategy, whispers began about what the end of the shutdown would mean. Would there be back pay for workers who had endured weeks of hunger and humiliation? Would accountability ever reach the politicians who weaponized suffering? And most chilling of all, what if this nightmare wasn't a one-time crisis, but a new normal for American democracy? For a fleeting moment, the heroes seemed to have won the moral high ground, their voices breaking through the noise with the power of truth. Yet the story wasn't over. And just when the public thought the nightmare was ending, the aftermath would shock everyone. The shutdown finally ended with the stroke of a pen. Cameras captured the moment, lawmakers shaking hands, the president announcing a deal, the chamber exhaling relief. But beyond the marble halls of Washington, relief was far more complicated. The checks began to flow again, back pay trickled into bank accounts, and government offices flickered back to life. Yet something deeper had been broken, something no executive order could instantly repair. On social media, the celebration was mixed with fury. Hashtags like Crown Shutdown Stories and Never Again trended for days, not just chronicling the hardship of the past weeks, but demanding accountability. Workers posted photos of long-overdue paychecks alongside grocery receipts, captions dripping with sarcasm. "Thanks for my rent money. A month late." Others uploaded videos of their kids opening stocked fridges again, the joy tempered by exhaustion. One tweet that went viral simply read, "You can pay us back, but you can't give us back the time we lost." News montages filled the airwaves. Families catching up on overdue bills, veterans finally receiving benefits, parks reopening to tourists. Smiles returned, but they were shadowed by fatigue. Reporters lingered on the hollowed faces of workers who had taken on debt to survive or whose credit scores had been shattered in the interim. Anchors spoke in hushed tones about the cost of governance by crisis. The shutdown had ended, but its scars were everywhere. And trust. Trust was the casualty no one could quite measure. Poll after poll showed Americans' faith in their leaders collapsing to historic lows. For millions, the shutdown confirmed what they had long suspected, that Washington was a stage for egos, not a place of service. Cafeteria workers and Coast Guard officers had become the moral voices of the nation, while politicians looked smaller than ever, their speeches replayed now as relics of arrogance. The ripple effects spread far beyond paychecks. In neighborhoods across the country, conversations turned political in ways they hadn't before. A waitress in Ohio told a reporter, "If they can do this once, what stops them from doing it again?" A father in Arizona, furloughed from his job at a federal lab, vowed never to miss another local election. The shutdown had awakened something raw, not apathy, but anger sharpened into resolve. Future elections loomed under its shadow. Campaign ads replayed haunting clips of families at food banks, reminding voters of who had stood firm and who had crumbled. Candidates pledged no more shutdowns. Their promises met with both cheers and skepticism. For incumbents who had dismissed the suffering, the political cost would arrive swiftly. For challengers, the shutdown became a rallying cry, proof that America's government needed not just leaders, but reformers. And the world was watching, too. International headlines spoke with disbelief. U.S. government shuts down, again. Foreign allies whispered concerns about American stability, while adversaries seized the chance to mock. In Europe, commentators wondered aloud if the global leader could be trusted when it couldn't even pay its own workers. In Asia, economists questioned the ripple effects on global markets. The shutdown, once dismissed as domestic politics, had revealed cracks in the image of American reliability. But perhaps the most lasting shockwave wasn't about politics or reputation. It was about identity. For weeks, ordinary Americans had stepped out of the shadows and told their stories. They had stood at microphones, held up their pay stubs, shown their empty fridges to the world. Their courage had forced the nation to look in the mirror, and once seen, those faces couldn't be unseen. The shutdown ended, but it left behind a transformed landscape, bitter, awakened, unsteady. Families were still digging out from debt. Children still carried memories of parents breaking down in panic, and workers still wondered if loyalty to country would ever be matched with loyalty from leaders. And yet, buried beneath the anger, a deeper lesson waited to be uncovered. When the noise of speeches faded and the cameras turned away, what remained was not the image of marble halls or grandstanding politicians, but the faces of ordinary Americans who had borne the weight of dysfunction with quiet strength. The shutdown was never just about frozen paychecks or closed parks. It was about the clash between arrogance and dignity, between power games and the people who make this country run. Every government in history faces crises, but the true test is not in the drama of the chamber. It is in whether leaders remember that behind every policy are lives, and behind every vote are families. In this shutdown, the politicians who gloried in brinkmanship revealed something hollow, the triumph of ego over duty. But the janitor who still showed up to clean the Capitol, the Coast Guard officer who kept watch over the seas, the mother at the IRS who prayed her kids would eat, they revealed something far greater. They revealed what America is made of, because dignity endures where dysfunction fails. When lawmakers used workers as bargaining chips, it was ordinary citizens who held the moral ground. They reminded the country and the world that America's strength has never come from politicians flexing on a stage. It comes from the millions who serve quietly, faithfully, without applause. The shutdown, for all its cruelty, carried a truth worth remembering. Power without empathy collapses under its own weight. The arrogance of those who played games with livelihoods cracked the moment real people spoke their truth. And in that contrast, a lesson was written. America cannot afford leaders who gamble with its soul. The real measure of democracy is not how loudly politicians fight, but how deeply they protect the people who trust them. The janitor, the single mom, the Coast Guard officer, they became the teachers of this lesson. Their stories lit a mirror that forced the nation to ask, do we choose pride or do we choose humanity? And if there is any redemption in this saga, it is that millions of Americans already chose. They chose empathy. They chose dignity. They chose to stand with those who serve. And in doing so, they proved stronger than the chaos unfolding in Washington, because the shutdown was never only about government. It was a battle of values, arrogance versus humanity, dysfunction versus dignity. And when the dust settled, one truth rang clear. The real shutdown wasn't of government. The real shutdown was of arrogance when the people stood tall. So what happens during a government shutdown in America? More than headlines, more than sound bites, lives are shaken, dignity is tested, and truth is revealed. Behind every statistic is a family wondering how to pay rent. Behind every closed monument is a child asking why their country isn't open for them. And behind every paycheck delayed is a worker who gave their loyalty to a nation that momentarily forgot its duty in return. But in the darkness of dysfunction, light emerged. Ordinary people, the true backbone of America, showed what resilience looks like. Their dignity stood taller than arrogance, their quiet strength louder than any speech. That is the story that must be remembered. This isn't just about one shutdown. It's about who we are and what we choose to value. Do we accept politics as a game of power, or do we demand a government that values people above posturing? The answer lies not in Washington, but in each of us. That's why your voice matters. Share this story. Add your own in the comments. Let the world know that the faces of America are not the politicians who play with livelihoods, but the workers, parents, and neighbors who carry the weight of this country every single day. Subscribe, not just to follow another video, but to join a movement that insists dignity is greater than dysfunction, that people matter more than politics. Because when we amplify these stories, we remind leaders of who they serve, and we remind ourselves of who we are. America is strongest when its people stand together. Let's keep standing tall.